6:01, and we're going to call the meeting to order. And Jessica, if you would please do the roll call for attendance, that would be great.
So I'm going to be a Joe Pictionary.
I think
There you are.
There.
I'm here.
Brittany de Alicante.
Present.
Barry Lind.
Here.
Michael Bean is absent. He had prearranged that. Issa Avian. Jack Martin. Okay. Terry Dillon.
I'm here.
Johnny Kirshenman.
Present.
Jenna McCauley.
Here.
And Eric Adams.
Here.
Perfect. All right, roll call complete.
Perfect. Want to begin then with the minutes and just see if there's any changes, input, or corrections that need to be made to the minutes. And if not, could we please have someone that would motion to approve those in a second?
I make a motion to approve. I didn't see any changes that needed to be made.
Perfect. Thank you, Terry. Second.
Second.
Joe is the second there. So then maybe just a thumbs up, I think will work, or hand up, all in favor, hand up, thumbs up, something. Perfect. All right, those unanimously are approved, those minutes. Jessica, do we have folks from the audience that that are wanting to share tonight?
Well, and we're just enabling that
Okay.
ability to indicate that they would like to speak. So we just want to pause just a little bit to allow them
Yes.
that opportunity. We do have 5 individuals currently in attendance.
Okay.
So just pause just one moment. And do you want to read? It does.
Yeah. I can do that. I can read just the kind of the instructions and information about those that would respond from the audience. So just it's a reminder that the meeting is being recorded. To those that would respond, the committee will listen to your comments, but not respond to public comment until the section in our business called committee response. Meeting minutes will be taken by staff and forwarded to the city manager and to city council members. And public can always send written testimony to the committee or to city council members as well. As we begin the meeting tonight, I'd like to ask the members of the audience to please keep yourself on mute until you are called to provide public testimony. Public testimony will allow speakers 2 minutes each, and we will go tonight for a total of 20 minutes. If you're joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak either of those times, please use the raise hand feature to make your request. You'll be called on when it's your turn to speak. Please identify your name, Springfield ward number, and the subject you'd like to speak about. For people calling in by phone only, you are in listen mode only and cannot be called upon. So there is that information. And with that, Jessica, if we have someone that would like to share tonight, we're ready to listen.
Okay. No, I don't. So I just want to reiterate that it's the raised hand feature.
Yes, I apologize if I didn't make that clear.
Oh, no, I think you did mention it. I just am reiterating that because I don't see anybody using that option. And I just wanted to give that one last moment because at this point, there's no one indicating they would like to speak at this time. So.
Okay. Do you want to wait a minute longer or can we move forward?
Oh, actually, just in time, it appears that Elizabeth Utterback has joined us and indicated that she would like to speak. And Elizabeth, I have enabled you to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, this is Lizzie Etterback from Ward 3. And I just had a question about the use of force numbers related to the dogs, the canines. I believe in Chief Lewis's bar graph that was presented a while back, it only showed that the dogs were deployed about 30 times. And then in other numbers that I heard this week, there was discussion of using them closer to 800 times. So I was just concerned about that discrepancy. It's quite large. I was wondering if the committee was aware of that, and how, why, what is the reason for that large discrepancy? Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica, are we thinking there's someone else still?
I was just pausing.
Yep, you're
Mary
doing
Bell
great.
just actually indicated that she would like to speak,
Okay.
and I have allowed her to talk. Mary, you should be able to enable the ability to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I wanted to ask a quick question. You said that there would be 2 opportunities to speak. Is that correct?
There is a section that we're in right now where the audience has opportunity to share their comments, their thoughts, and then the committee as a whole can respond after this section.
It's just right now. Okay.
Yes, yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, then I want to actually cede my time and wait until after the discussion with the body worn cameras and the vehicle equipment and all of that policy. So thank you.
Well, let me be clear again, that we won't be hearing from the audience after this section.
I know
So-
I'll be sending a written response.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we
Yep.
understood each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that does appear to be the end of public comment.
Very good. Take a moment here for committee response to really just the one comment at this point. And is there a way that we could respond to that question of use of force with dogs and 2 different numbers out there?
Yes, I'd be happy to respond to that.
Thank you, George.
So for those that didn't pick up on it, my name's George Crawley. I'm a lieutenant at Springfield PD, and I'm filling in tonight. Regarding the canine deployments, this did come up somewhere else recently. There's a really easy way to clarify this. The use of force deployments have to do with when the dog was deployed with the purpose of capturing a suspect and actually use force, bit, tackled, knocked over a person that the police were chasing. That number of 30 is accurate. The number of close to 800 deployments that was referred to in another meeting has to do with a different type of deployment. Essentially, every time the dog is brought out of the car by the canine officer to participate in a track, which is the dog sniffing, looking to find somebody, trying to track a person. If the dog is brought out of the car for things like that, that's another type of deployment. And sometimes it's article searches. Sometimes we're looking for a weapon in a case. Other times we're looking for a piece of property. Other times we're looking for a missing suspect. That type of deployment is not a use of force. So that's why those numbers are so different. So in a way, 30 uses of force out of the 800 deployments is the number that we can compare. Hopefully that clears it.
Thank you. Just clarification even more for me. Did you say then on the second with the 800, are they under a leash? Is that the proper way to say it? They're connected to an officer at that point at all times?
Yes, they're on either a short or a long line, depending on what type of terrain or environment they're on. They're under control of the handler at that point.
Thank you for that clarification. Other comments or, well, comments at this point from the committee?
Good to know the difference, though.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Very good. Okay. Having done that, I think what we'll do is we'll move on right now then to business from the Springfield Police Department. And there's several things which you're going to be giving us updates and information on. So I turn that back over to you, George.
Okay, thank you, Barry. It is very busy around here these days. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 different hiring processes going on. A police process is happening. We have, I believe, either 9 or 10 openings, and that doesn't include the officers that are in training right now. So we held a testing week and a half ago. On the weekend, we do a written test and move to an ORPAT test. And for those that don't know, the ORPAT is the physical agilities test, the Oregon physical agilities test. And folks that move on from that move on to the interview process. We had a board of 4 employees that interviewed, I believe it was 27 applicants over a 2-day period, last Sunday and Monday. And of the 27, I believe 10 or 12 moved on to the second interview phase. And out of that interview phase, they've identified 8 applicants that are potential police officers. At this point, those applicants will be moved to a background phase, and that includes anything and everything from questionnaires to psychs, medicals, in-person interviews. And it'd be great if we got all 8 of those folks hired as police officers. Realistically speaking, it probably won't happen for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's a background issue. Sometimes it's people pull out of the process because there are multiple processes at once with other agencies. Not to mention the fact that if you told me today we could hire 8 people tomorrow, we couldn't do it because we have a limited number of field training officers that actually do the training, and to have 8 brand new employees on the road at once isn't practical. That being said, if we could phase it in and we end up with all 8, that'd be great. We could space it out over a period of time. We're going to continue with another testing process. We'll identify that, sit down with HR sometime in the near future, probably the next month and a half to 2 months, have another process, get more applicants, hopefully, and work on the finer details of recruiting, things like that, looking at different types of ways to entice people to come to Springfield. Other process we're running is a records process. We're down a couple employees in records. They did testing last weekend, interviews. I think interviews happened over the last couple of days, trying to find records personnel. And records, for those that don't know, it's a catch-all term. They don't just work records. They answer non-emergency calls. They enter calls for service. They take bail money, post bail for the jail, and amongst all the other administrative duties that need to happen around here. We had a jail process several days ago, and they had an interview board. Again, I don't remember the exact numbers, but out of the interview board panel that employees participated in, they get moved to the second interview board, which is a chief and lieutenant board. And I believe 4 people may be moving on for 1 opening at the jail. We're in need of 1 detention officer. And so fingers crossed that we're going to get a really good applicant out of those 4, fill that position. And then obviously we're finishing up our process for our PIO, community PIO process, finishing up all the background medical psych stuff that goes along with pre-employment. I hope to have that wrapped up soon. That's the employment front. Training. The department participated in crowd control training last week. The training was hosted by we hosted it. State police came down here and put on training for the whole department. It was divided up into 2 different training sessions to allow all employees to participate. Training was a combination of hands-on training. It was PowerPoint, everybody's favorite type of training, but a lot of good, valuable information that comes out of that. And then we go outside with the state police crowd control unit, and they train us on different techniques, procedures, ways to move, ways to communicate, effective means of crowd control. That it's a proven way of doing things that's in line with best practices of crowd control across the nation. Body cam training is going to be taking place in a little less than 3 weeks. We've identified May 24th, 25th, and 26th as our training days. Obviously, it takes us a few days to get everybody trained up because we have a bunch of employees and we can't all have them all in one room at one time. So it's divvied up into 4 different classes. In addition to just the body cam training and the in-car video training, there'll be a separate training for administrators, supervisors, to make sure that supervisors know the ins and outs of how to review footage, how to conduct IA, internal affairs investigations, and how to handle complaints, make sure we're doing that in line with our policies and procedures, and again, best practices of how body cams work across the country. Though we're honestly, it's probably it's an exciting time right now with all the stuff moving forward. We're looking forward to that. Additionally, in line with our review of our use of force policy changes, and especially in line with the OIR group's recommendations pursuant to the Stacey Kenny settlement, we've identified training that we need to participate in to not only equip our officers with the right means of dealing with situations, but make sure we're on the same page. Everybody's on the same page with how to deal with various scenarios, from static resistance, passive resistance, to active resistance, to an armed person. We want people to be all on the same page of how we're doing that. And in addition to just reading policy and watching a online video, several instructors are going to different trainings here in the very near future. Now that COVID's opening up, those instructors can actually attend the face-to-face training, learn techniques, learn procedures that will help us reduce injuries to officers, injuries to suspects. The use of force review is really helpful for us to identify where we need to improve. We're crazy if we don't look in the mirror and identify what things we need to work on, and as well as get the input from others about whether it's experts or citizens about what we can do to use appropriate force. So that training should be taking place hopefully as soon as June. We are evaluating a virtual option of training to where training can be done any day, any time of day. It's through, I don't know exactly all the details because our sergeant that's reviewing is making the proposal right now to move forward with it, but it incorporates essentially a virtual reality component to allow officers to, anytime they want to go and train, they don't need to have other people. They can plug into virtual reality type component, practice scenarios, everything. And it's not just, I say use of force training, it's also de-escalation training. There are scenarios programmed in that don't require the use of a firearm or a baton or a taser. A lot of it's going to be verbal de-escalation, and it reinforces with our officers that there's ways to resolve situations that don't necessarily need to be through actual use of force. Looking forward to that. I got a lot to talk about, sorry.
I wonder if there's just any questions so far. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll take a break and then
Yeah.
we'll go, because I got a bunch of stuff. It's been busy.
Because like I had a question just about it way at the beginning, 9 to 10 openings, is that unusual? I haven't been on this committee long enough to know, is that unusual, or is that, how typical is that?
It's not typical. Usual, anywhere from 3 to 4 openings is typical, either through retirements, through attrition, through folks not making probation, whether they voluntarily leave or just aren't cutting it for one reason or another. We had several not quite unanticipated retirements, folks that are eligible to retire, but retired a little earlier than they were planning.
Okay.
It was kind of a difficult year for police. I'm not going to sit here and complain and cry to people that, oh, our job's tough. It is. But for those that were at the end of their career that were maybe hoping to stay on a couple years longer, they found an opportunity to say, you know, I'm eligible to retire, I'm going to go. we had a few of those happen all of a sudden, and that put us kind of behind the 8 ball. Recruiting's tough right now. Getting folks to apply, our numbers for applicants are way down. The only upside to that is that the people that are applying are folks that are genuinely wanting to make a difference and genuinely want to be part of Springfield PD and the community and care a lot about the community and want to be part of that. So we're getting a higher quality of applicant, maybe a lot less lower number of actual people applying, because that number of 9 or 10 is very high.
How has, I hope this is a fair question. How has, and I'm sorry, I'm just jumping all over this, people, but and I'll be quiet after this. How has just the events of this last year and you acknowledging it's really been a tough year, has that impacted the way Springfield Police Department does hiring, or does the recruitment? Certainly it involves the training, but just how has that process affected what this process is hiring?
We are trying to do a better job with community outreach and reaching out to the public to let people know what exactly police work involves. COVID restrictions have, I blame this for so much, it's kind of goofy, but our ability to interact with the public through citizens police academies, through canine demonstrations, at the competition at the high school, the shows and tell at the high school, we always participate in the reading programs, all that's gone, which has really limited our ability to do community outreach and recruit through, even, it's silly, but going to one of the elementary schools I go to read at, you sit there, you talk to kindergartners. We're not recruiting them, but they go home and tell mom and dad about this police officer did that. Mom and dad have a chance to talk about what's going on in the community and encourage their friend or family to come in. So that challenge is there right now, and reaching out to folks to get them to come in. We bought a radio spot on the radio and we advertised in the radio, thinking there's another way to reach out to people. We're also trying to identify how to get applicants from other agencies without saying we're stealing police officers from another agency, but how we can actively say, hey, if you don't want to work over here, we'll take you here. And we want, if you're a good officer, we want you on board. That's tough. And I see
That's called poaching, George.
I know Councilor Christian Mary is familiar. I came from the Lyon County Sheriff's Office 23 years ago. I got poached. So I'm I benefited from that. But that's the challenge, Barry, is different ways to get out and recruit people and get them on board. And we used to do a lot of that. We're hoping, if all goes well, we'll be back at that this summer once restrictions ease up.
Questions or comments from anyone else on the committee for what George has presented already? Brittany.
I just had a quick question about the background check process. Is that all done internally? And then maybe you can break down a little bit more about what it entails too.
Sure. The background, we've done a couple different things for our background process. Oftentimes a professional standards sergeant or a detective does the background on an applicant. If our numbers are good, if our staffing allows for it, that person will be detached to do a background. Our staffing's not good right now. So we've contracted with a former police officer in the area and hired that person to assist with backgrounds. So Sergeant Massey, the professional standards sergeant, is doing backgrounds through contract investigator, the backgrounds. Backgrounds, Brittany, consist a lot of reference checks, personal checks, talking to everybody's spouse, kids, boyfriends, girlfriends, neighbors. When I did backgrounds, a great thing to do is go knock on the neighbor's door unannounced and say, hey, what can you tell me? Drop in at the house and see how people are. They sign a waiver that allows us to ask a lot of questions from former employers that employers don't typically get to say about former employees. And this waiver says, this person allows you to say whatever you want, be honest. That's just the first phase of the background. Next phase includes a medical exam. We contract through Cascade Health for a very comprehensive medical exam. And then the psych exam, we contract through a psychologist or psychologist. And we contract with a gentleman's firm out of Portland right now And they do not only the little fill in the bubble tests and ABCD personality, MMPI personality test, but then they also do a face-to-face interview with the subject to not only evaluate them face-to-face, but confront any issues that came up during the written portion of the psych. So it's a long process. You typically a couple weeks to get through it.
Yeah, wow, great to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have one question too. If someone has applied this time and doesn't quite make it, are they eligible to like wait a year and come back and reapply? And if so, is it done without prejudice of what happened this year?
They don't even have to wait a year, Miss Dillon. They can come back the next process. Sometimes people have a bad day. Whether it's a bad day on the written, they just didn't get the high enough score. They had a headache, they were sick, whatever. Sometimes the ORPAT, people, they'll fall down, they'll hurt themselves, they'll twist an ankle, or quite frankly, they're not in great shape. And that's an eye opener for people. And the best thing about that process is the fact that if they do fail at that, we do give them the opportunity to come back and prove themselves. And it's great. I was the ORPAT instructor for 15 years here. It's great seeing somebody who failed the first time come back a couple months later and just go blow right through the test, succeed, and you see their confidence shoot through the roof. They go into the interview the next day or 2 days later with so much confidence and feeling good about themselves. Those are the people that succeed the most, the ones that have showed improvement. Same thing with the interview. People have bad interview days. Some people are nervous. Some people, they're asking, please hire me and I'm your best candidate. But sometimes people don't have their best day when they're talking. They get nervous and we get second, third, fourth chances.
Right.
Encourage people to continue to reapply.
Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments.
You're welcome.
Joe.
Thank you, Pastor Lind. So, George,
Yes, sir.
I've got a series, and believe me, my questions are not intended to cause any issues, but they're mostly for information. For example, you mentioned your FTOs. What I was curious was, first of all, do they get premium pay?
Yes, they get 5%.
5%. So it's like many agencies or fire departments where they get, for the higher their certification level, they get premium pay. So there's some incentive there. So I guess the question then is that what is, if you know approximately how long tenured, or I should say how long tenured in the FTO program is the newest FTO? Meaning, so I'm going back to see if the FTO generation, is it from 5 years ago that they started FTOing, or is it 2 years or 10 years? So I'm just trying to figure out if there's a generational thing with the cadre of FTOs, or is it mixed? And is there active recruitment for new FTOs for the, I guess, for the newer breed, so to speak?
That's a great question. We have a wide variety of mix of FTOs. I think our youngest, least senior FTO is a 6-year officer, and our highest tenured FTO is a 20-year officer. I believe we have 9 FTOs right now. That's constantly evaluated. Our FTO sergeant does evals with the FTOs, has regular quarterly meetings with them to discuss what's working, what's not. And we'll recently just did another process where encourages everybody to apply, but the current FTOs reapply and get reevaluated. And we recently instituted a feedback program for our recruits to anonymously provide feedback, or named if they prefer, on how their training was and what they thought of their FTO.
That's awesome.
It's a great way of doing it because it holds us all accountable to make sure we're not just going it with it because that's what we've always done it. It forces us to reevaluate, and it keeps everybody honest. Keeps the FTOs aware that, hey, they're getting graded too. They're going to earn that 5%. Right outside of my office right now, I'm not going to name him because it'll probably embarrass him. My door's closed, but he won't hear me. An FTO's with our officer that just got out of the academy last week, and he's 1 week into his phase of and they've been out there for the last hour going over report writing. They had an incident happen today, which this kid is writing a long report, and I've eavesdropped a little bit before the meeting. And there's a lot of mentorship going on with how to do this, how to do that. And he's earning his 5% today. He's earning that because an FTO can just say, turn your report in, don't worry about it. Or an FTO can say, let me read that and let me help you craft this and do it the right way and learn the right way first, as opposed to correcting it later. And that's what's happening out there now.
Well, that's awesome. And in fact, it actually sent a little tingly down my spine when you told me that, in a good way, when you told me that the recruits are asked for feedback on their FTOs, because that is so flipping important, so important, especially when they're allowed to do it. I don't know how you could figure out how they could do it anonymously, because you wouldn't know what FTO or what recruit is saying what, but regardless,
Yeah.
the
Well,
feedback.
I guess what I mean by anonymously is that the FTO is not told, by the way, recruit so-and-so said this about you.
Oh, okay.
It's
I
meant
get it.
to be a constructive criticism and feedback,
Okay.
without it getting back to the FTO saying, hey, by the way, then if we have a personality or personnel conflict, if we can
Right.
eliminate that by deal with constructive criticism, that's how we're
No,
doing it.
that's great. And hopefully too, that if something comes up where they drop the proverbial bomb in your pocket based on those interviews, that people are ready to respond to that officially.
I'm looped in on every end of phase review before it gets finalized. Before the end of phase happens, I get a copy of that end of phase memo and I review it thoroughly to make sure that the FTO's identified not just strengths and weaknesses, but a solid recommendation for what they're going to be doing next phase.
Awesome. So in my next question / comment, you mentioned about detention officers, that you had 4 and that you're hiring 1, but I didn't hear if, because hiring is not only very difficult, it's expensive. So I assume you create a hiring list?
That is correct. We do
Okay.
identify people that are on the list, that if there's a future vacancy, and I believe we try to stick with the generally 6-month rule.
6 to a year? Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not positive, please don't quote me on that, but I believe we try to identify a 6-month list, but I think we will expand it if we say it's May now, but we anticipate a retirement in December. We
Right.
may expand that list to go to December instead of running a whole new process.
Right.
Recontact that individual. Hey, have you been hired anywhere else yet? You still want to work here? Go through the process and run
Right.
with somebody that's qualified.
And I know there's several agencies that are going with a 6-month list or 6 months check-in. So they have the opportunity for the candidate to re-up, so to speak, and give themselves a 6-month extension on that, which therefore would thereby save the agency a ton of money as well. But I don't know if you do that, but it may be worth doing. Second is you're mentioning about the training for the sergeants in regards to internal investigations, et cetera. Do you have, I know we're moving forward with IA Pro, and so I assume you have a vigorous program set up to also get the supervisors up to speed as quickly as possible on that program?
Yes, as soon as possible. Honestly, as soon as it's all approved, purchased, installed, whatever the terminology is we're getting supervisors on board immediately, familiarized with that program, and they'll have trainers from IA Pro that will show supervisors how to do the ins and outs of it, because I'm not going to pretend to know how to do it. I'm going to learn it just like everybody else,
Right.
and go from there. And that'll be the most important part of using that, is making sure everybody's very familiar and comfortable with using it. So there's no excuses of, I didn't like it, or I'm not comfortable with it. We're eliminating that excuse.
Awesome. And I would like to suggest at this time that at some point when we can meet, to put in queue where you can show and allow this committee to look at that software program and play around with just the screen, obviously not inside of the data, but of the current data, but creating fictitious data, so we all know what is available, how it can be documented, and how it can be retrieved in a sense. So in case anybody in this committee is asked, hey, is that just a funky program that's to cover their own tails, or the fox watching the chickens or whatever, I want to be able to show that, I want to be able to see, and the citizens here see that program is not only robust, but it also has high integrity.
I agree. And what I'll ask, and I don't know how this will work, I can, Sergeant Massey, who did the research on this, was able to get us basically a demo video for those who weren't able to attend a one-on-one training. I think it's a link to the site they have. I don't know if there's proprietary information on there, but I'd like to be able to share something like that so you can see that type of demonstration.
I think that would be invaluable for at least at the minimum this committee, for sure. So at least that way we can share what we observe to the citizens and show that we're taking those steps and it's real. It's not just some smoke screen that people may think. And the last part, sorry, I mean, I love this stuff too. I mean, I love training. I love it. And I love seeing the department respond, and it's responding to me in a fantastic way. And I think we need to just keep pushing that direction. The virtual feedback or the virtual training, it's similar to what we call CBT or computer-based training. So the virtual training, they can do that anytime they wish, but I'm wondering what kind of how they receive feedback as to their performance during this virtual training. So is there, they can, is it graded? Is it redlined? Is it, I mean, do they say, hey, you need to really improve in this area? So what kind of feedback feature is that?
I'm going to give you my easy answer. I don't know. We're evaluating several different types, several different companies, and we have a couple of really excited use of force defensive tactics instructors right now, who basically I took them off leash and said, go find something, find best practices, find what other people are using, ask around, and let's look into it. And they've identified 2 or 3 companies right now that have similar features. I just don't know the differences yet. One of them literally involves the virtual reality headgear. Another one is a giant screen that it covers a whole wall, and it involves all kinds of bigger technology, which also includes bigger dollar signs.
Right.
So we're trying to find that compromise, something that's efficient, affordable, and reasonable that works well. And I just don't know the answer to that question yet, Joe.
Okay, well, I'm really curious, and it was really good, a step in the right direction. I appreciate it. And I'm done with my grilling for right now.
If there's nothing else, I know, George, you had several more items to discuss, and if we could move on to that.
Sure, there are a couple of brief ones. Myself and a captain from Eugene Police Department and a battalion chief from Eugene Fire Department have been meeting regularly the last couple of weeks, just to go over our policies and procedures with interactions with fire. Traditionally, Springfield Police Department has had an excellent, really fun, awesome relationship with Springfield Fire Department. Those departments merged a couple of years ago, which creates changes within that department. And I don't know if historically Eugene Fire has had the same relationship with Eugene Police as we have with Springfield Police. So there's been bumps in the roads, and we're trying to identify how we best communicate, how we call for assistance, how the medics call for assistance when they need us, how certain details are in calls that they need to know, as opposed to a cop just getting on the radio to the dispatcher saying, send the fire department over here. Well, that doesn't do any good. They need to know more details of what they're responding to. Same for us when they call and say, send the police code 3. Well, code 3 to us, to police, means we better get their lights and sirens really fast because something bad's happening. Sometimes the word code 3 can get misinterpreted, and they just have a disorderly person they want us to assist with. So we're working on our communication, and it's been, aside from it being on Zoom, it's been kind of fun for the last month and a half to interact with folks from EPD and from fire to make sure we're all on the same page with responses. And several of us on this group have worked together on major incidents, including the shooting on Oakdale that happened a couple of years ago. And we can look back on that of how we can respond in the future. So that's been good. The last thing I'll mention is the Olympic trials are coming up, and Springfield's hosting the 20-kilometer race walk. And I didn't know what that was before I took this job. And I've done some reading and research, and it's pretty interesting. It's very competitive. City of Springfield was great enough to say, we want it here. They designed a course. It's a 1-kilometer course. They do 20 laps. It starts and ends in front of the fountain at the library in front of City Hall. And I think it's kind of a cool, fun event. It's the only Olympic trial event that's happening in Springfield, but it does draw some positive attention to the city. It allows our officers to go out there and interact with people. Gosh knows what our COVID restrictions will be at that time, but we will have a little bit of an opportunity to be seen in the public in a non-enforcement capacity. We're not pulling somebody over. We're not responding to their dispute or arresting them for DUI. We're doing security for an event. We're controlling traffic, making sure the spectators and the participants are safe. That buys us some goodwill with the public and shows that we're doing what we can to help with this Olympic trials and make sure it succeeds. So I've been doing Zoom meetings on that once to twice a week for the last month and a half or two. It's been increased lately, and we're working really well together with everybody from Tracktown USA, University of Oregon to Homeland Security. There's a lot of people on board with this, and we want to make it a successful event that the city can be proud of. And I
That'd be
think
great.
that's all my updates.
Thank you.
Wonder, did you get a chance to meet with Brittany? I had in the minutes, and so I just wanted to make sure that that meeting was able to happen. And then Brittany, any comments that you want to make from that? Because I know that was important to you.
Yeah, thank you. We did. We actually met yesterday afternoon, and so it was great to have a conversation with Lieutenant Crawley and talk through some of the questions related to the body-worn cameras policies. And hopefully, I'm hoping those kinds of, and we'll talk about this a little later in the meeting, but hoping those kinds of conversations are something we can start doing in this forum, so that kind of the questions this committee has can be heard by the citizens and the public, and kind of walk through why certain decisions were made, and also yeah, just help me get more information about yeah, why things are structured this way, and maybe make recommendations for things that can be considered in the future. Yeah, so thank you, Lieutenant Crawley. It was great meeting you.
It was nice to meet you too. I agree. It was good, and I hope we can do that more often with everybody.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I see in the other section here, after SPD update is policy review. Just to touch base, it looks like the code of conduct policy regarding business cards was completed and it's been enacted. I don't know if that's the right word, but we've started it last couple of weeks, and that was generally had to do with a request from the public saying we should be providing business cards when people ask for them, and that's kind of a yeah, we should. And we also tried to identify times when we'll be offering business cards. So I'm going to pull that up now. At this time, the policy indicates that we're required to provide a name or badge number if requested by the public. And you know what? I'm just going to go to the new policy because it looks like I have the red line version where it has all kinds of marks on it. Essentially, an officer conducts a traffic stop at the conclusion, or a pedestrian stop. At the conclusion of the stop, they are to offer their business card to the citizen. And there's various reasons why we came to that time frame as opposed to at the beginning or in the middle of the stop. At the end of the stop is the appropriate time through consulting with other agencies and once again identifying the best practices in the industry. Making sure people have an opportunity when I walk up at the end of the car, whether I don't write tickets, but if we write a ticket or not, we can walk up and say, would you like my business card? It's available to you. On the business card, it has good identifying information who the officer is. On the back of the card, it's also, there's some Spanish language to assist those whose English is a second language to them, to make sure they have an opportunity to call the police department if they have an issue. There's a section on the back to identify a day of the week or time of day to best reach that officer. Try to make it a little bit more than just, here's a card, good luck getting a hold of me. We want to make it as easy as possible for the public to get a hold of us if they have a question or concern. So that was looks like that was the major policy change, I believe, is between this meeting and last meeting. The in-car video policy is in the works right now, should be fine, hopefully getting finalized soon. Use of force policy is completed. And the workplace relationship policy is in the middle of edit 2 or 3 right now to make sure not only is it in compliance with the city admin policy that was recently changed as recently as a month ago? There's a new city reg on that. We're making sure our policy is not only compliant with that, but maybe more specific to identify everything from who a supervisor is to who a trainer is. So there's no question about who can engage in any kind of type of personal relationship, and make sure that's taken care of.
Brittany.
Yes. 2 questions, I think now. For the relationships policy you were just talking about, will we get a chance to look at that one?
Brittany, I'm sorry, I don't know the rules on that. I'm the fill-in guy.
Okay.
I will ask. I don't know the rules
Okay.
on that. If Jessica's on, maybe she can answer, but I don't know the rules, how that works as far as through this committee, but I'll find out.
Awesome. Thank you.
So just as a quick clarification, I did inquire on the status of it, and it just wasn't in a status that was ready for me to look at. So I just know it's in draft. It's one of those that was earmarked and mentioned of interest to this committee. And when there is a draft version, the intent is to bring it back in accordance to what we're about to discuss later. So that was the intent. It just wasn't ready for now. But I did list it in the policy review list because it was noted as interest. And I just am keeping those kind of as a parking lot so that you know that they're not missing, you know, that there's intent.
Yes, that they're flagged. Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
And then my second question, Lieutenant Crawley, is in the business card policy in line, or it's item 3, that last line there, where it says, or if a supervisor has relieved the member of the department's business card mandate. I'm wondering if you could provide a little bit of context for that, and yeah, maybe illuminate if like a supervisor has to provide justification for relieving somebody of that, and kind of what might lead them to make that decision.
Yep, I'm scrolling to it right now because the printed version doesn't have that.
Would you like me to, I was going to offer earlier and I didn't interrupt. Can I just share my screen? It just does change your vision, but then at least the location is up. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Perfect.
Brittany, you stole my question.
Okay, thank you very much, Jess. One of the exceptions has to do with the supervisor relieve the member of the department's business card mandate. Oftentimes that's going to be a situation where it's an active situation where in the middle of a dispute, in the middle of a barricaded subject or a SWAT call to where there's a perimeter set up and officers' attention has to be focused on the task at hand. And it hasn't happened. I don't anticipate it happening very much, but in those type of situations where we're working an active scene, we're tracking a suspect on a call. When somebody walks up and we're going through someone's backyard with the dog and we're chasing somebody, hey, what are you doing? I want your business card. I want to know what you're doing. At that time, that would be a situation where a supervisor would speak up and say, I'm relieving you of your requirement to do this at this time because you need to focus on the task at hand. That supervisor will take responsibility for it and articulate, hey, there's a reason why I relieved that person. It just takes the onus off the individual to feel like, oh my gosh, did I violate the policy by telling that person no? It allows the supervisor to say, I told him he could say no. I told her she could say no because they're actively involved in a situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's hard to think of every little detail when we write these policies. There's always going to be something that comes up. It's like, we should have included that, or what about this situation? So we leave that in there to allow a supervisor to do.
Okay, any other questions before we move on in the agenda?
And one thing is I apologize if I didn't get you the updated agenda, but there's the use of force final version and the red line version. I just wanted to make sure to note that that was something that was mentioned in the past. This is one that was readily available. And just for context of what the difference is on our side, what that means to us, I just wanted to point out that scenario, I guess.
Thank you. Okay. I know that there was a team that from this committee that was planning to get together and meet, Terry and Brittany and Jenna and Jessica. I really appreciated 4 of you jumping in and doing that work. And so under the policy review work plan, could we get an update from whoever wants to share that? What came out of your meeting, and how can we be a part of that as a committee as a whole?
Brittany, you kind of spearheaded some of that. Why don't you go ahead and take it if you don't mind?
Oh, thank you. I was gonna, maybe Jenna, do you want to talk about the kind of overall thing, and then I can go into the kind of policy list that I came up with, maybe divide it up that way?
Sure, that works just fine. So I know that the last time that we met, we talked about how policies are reviewed and kind of how this committee would dovetail into that. And so the 4 of us did have the opportunity to get together and kind of talk that through. And I think that it fits really nicely with the review and the boards and commissions that Jessica shared with us on sort of our place in that process. So it was an opportunity to just kind of put some of that formalization in there so that both this committee understands, you know, some of our work and how we can help inform police discussions and policy reviews, et cetera, as well as really provide clarity for our community on when policies are discussed, and so that there is really clearly articulated opportunities for them to share feedback with us, with the police department, and just a better understanding. Also recognizing that it's quite a bit, and so we want to make sure that we use everyone's time efficiently, that we kind of came up with some ideas, and I think I'll just, if you're okay, I'll step through kind of the 3 breakdowns. I think the first recommendation that we came up with was perhaps annually there could be a subcommittee, and it doesn't need to be the same folks every time. Oh, there. Thank you, Jessica. That's awesome. So it doesn't have to be the same folks every single time, just less than a quorum of this group that could come together and discuss if there were any policies that made sense in context of the many things happening in the department, in the city, in the larger community, and essentially pull those for discussion and public comment and public review. Doesn't mean that there's going to necessarily be any change, but it would be an opportunity for all of us to better understand them and ask any questions. And even, you know, just like we just did with the opportunity to say, okay, tell us a little bit more about what the meaning behind a supervisor providing, you know, excluding them from the policy, that kind of thing. So we didn't want to bite off more than we could chew, and we realized that 12 was probably the most that we could get through, assuming that at some point we get back to our regularly scheduled sort of 4-a-year meetings. And so that was kind of the idea, was to set up a framework for a work plan. The other component that came out of it was we realized that this committee is intended by the council to be reflective of our community and representative of different groups and agencies, et cetera. And we should commit to reviewing them. So personally, not necessarily in this committee, but the committee members in general, we were proposed that perhaps we commit to reading them biannually. I think we were asking the last time how frequently the police department reviews and reflects, but there's an onus on the committee to have a familiarity with the policies in general. And that way, when approached by the public around questions, we at least have a working knowledge of which policies would be impacted, not to speak on behalf of the department, but to help clarify or point folks to the right policy. And then finally, kind of just that review process. So once the committee develops sort of a work plan for the remainder of the year, that we would really articulate for our public the outline around when we're going to talk about it and what that means. So I think it was really important for all of us to hear and for our community to know we're not an approving body, that there's a process, and it includes legal review and council review and best practices, as Lieutenant Crowley has shared a couple of times now, around national and all of the different components that weigh in, state legislation, etc. But that we're an input body that's reflective of the questions of our community. So again, a little bit of onus on us to make sure that we are saying, hey, community, here's a policy that we're going to first talk about. So we're just going to put it out there, let the department sort of present the hows and the whys. We're going to ask our first round of questions, and then we will articulate it on our agenda so that we can keep better track of, I really appreciated Jessica had it on there tonight, final. So that in between our meetings, we have the opportunity to connect with our community and bring back feedback that may have come up. And it just, again, it puts a little responsibility back on us, because I think that one of the fantastic roles of this is that we can reflect our areas. And so, for example, if there are policies that I know would definitely be impactful with the school district, that would be something that I'd want to make sure that I take responsibility of saying, hey, the committee discussed this. Here are the things I know about it. Do you have any questions? And then allow for a little more robust of those questions, like Brittany was talking about, that she had the opportunity to sit down with Lieutenant Crowley and ask. I think that our broader community would benefit from both being involved in those questions, but also hearing the discussion back and forth. So that's a lot of talking. I'm going to pause for a second and see if I missed anything. And Terry and Brittany, please jump in.
I think you covered it very well.
That was a great summary, Jenna. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I can talk a little bit about, unless people have other questions, sorry, I'll pause for a minute, and then I can talk about the kind of policies that were proposed.
My only thought is when we review a policy, if we could get it more than just a couple of days, maybe, or a day or two before our meeting. Sometimes I find I've got so much on my plate and I don't get a chance to read as well as I should prior to a meeting. So I might need just a little more time, if that's possible.
That's fair.
So for full disclosure, that was kind of my thought too. If we knew what our work plan was, we'd kind of know what was coming up, and we'd have the ability to sort of look forward for those free moments of time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of plan like a full year in advance what we're going to be reviewing, and that way we'll have tons of time to hopefully be able to look at stuff in more detail. I struggle with that too. I'm in the same boat where I'm like, I have my job and all this other stuff to do, and then review the policy. So no, yes. And so to talk about, so we had a total of 9 policies that we're proposing to review over the next year. And I was primarily the person who came up with this list. I based it off of a number of things. I listened a lot to the comment at City Council and at our committee meetings. I also went through the Brazil report, OIR report, and flagged any policies that were mentioned there. And I know SBD and City Council might also be addressing those. But I thought it might make sense for us to also give input, and we might think of things that they didn't, vice versa. So yeah, there's a couple policies that are listed as or here. That was mostly, I guess they could also be ands too. We wanted to be sure we didn't bite off more than we could chew, because again, it's only a year and there's a lot to read. But there's also, so the death, injury notification and community relations, that was kind of related to some of the condolences that were talked about in the OIR report. And so I wasn't sure kind of which one would maybe best address that if we wanted to give feedback in that area. I'm leaning probably community relations might make the most sense there. And then same with the training programs, that's kind of my own ignorance. And if we want to recommend certain types of trainings, I was thinking things like diversity, mental health training. I was so glad to hear Lieutenant Crowley talk about the de-escalation trainings. That's awesome. Wasn't sure which category that would fit into in terms of career and service trainings or training programs. But yeah, just kind of trying to generally address some training recommendations we might have.
So then kind of just the last little component of it, before maybe we can dive in and talk about whether that's the right group of lists that the committees put forward or subcommittees put forward. is Jessica has done a fantastic job,
Yes.
and she's tracking for us. And so she
Yes, she
also
has.
shared with it kind of what we've already talked about recently, and what's sort of on the horizon that we've asked about and inquired about. So I think nothing that we're putting forward is intended to sort of prevent any other policies that the department would love the community's input on, or that kind of bubble up in other ways. And so Jessica, in order to kind of help us keep focused, and so that in a year or two, if it's different faces on this community, or if we've all just gotten lost in the paperwork and we've forgotten what we've already done, we may be saving ourselves the time of rehashing the same things over and over.
You guys have done great work. Thank you so much. It's a great start. Comments, questions from the committee?
I got a question. So these reviews you're talking about, and it sounds like you are also perhaps forwarding recommendations to change some policies. Is that my understanding?
I don't know that there's an implied like request to change. I think that the conversation was around this is a great venue to have discussion about police policy for our community. And so we tried to call out the acknowledgement that the purview of adopting policies, governing policies, and all of that was very firmly in the police department in their process. But this would be an opportunity to continue the conversation and situational awareness for our community. So, for example, canines came up in the discussion tonight with our public. So perhaps at a future iteration, there's a review of canine policy so that people can understand, the difference in language, but not necessarily the assumption that there would then be the request for change or the expectation of change.
And I was saying that for the benefit of others that are listening too, is that I think it's a great idea. I think there's really a different language spoken in the world of law enforcement, and it's almost like an ESL class is needed or it could be an LEO SL class, because there is terms like tonight is a perfect example. Canine deployments. Well, there is definitely two different types of deployments where they're used against an individual and to take action on an individual versus a search or a implement search or a drug search or assist even a lost person search, those type of things where there's tons of good. There's and you can see that there's 800 deployments with a dog that are absolutely fantastic for the community. Nothing negative about it. It's just working, as opposed to there's some downward type or negative looking things or things that happen in that world but there's only like 30 some odd cases of that, specifically canine. But your work to me is super, because it is an education piece to where folks really, I think really the biggest problem is that there's an understanding level that people need to be brought up to some understanding of why certain things happen and why they're in place. And this is a perfect venue for that. And so I think it's really great that you guys are doing that. More power to you on that committee. And I don't want any part of another committee. And so far, well, so far, everything I see you guys are doing is just fantastic, and I wanted to compliment you for that, because it's I think it's really going to help, because you become you're credible already to other citizens because you're citizens as well. So you don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. So it's a great idea and a great forum, and I look forward to seeing more things coming out of it.
Thank you.
Eric, you have your hand raised, please.
Thanks, Barry. Appreciate your all's work on this and pulling it together. I think perfect follow on to our discussion at the last meeting. What extent of staff involvement would you envision in terms of working through the policies reviews, considering best practices that may be implemented in other jurisdictions that don't necessarily align with the current policies, and that way we're surfacing those issues and considerations as part of bringing this to the public's attention at the same time.
I think that's a great question. I think that it was not a question that the committee took up, but I think that the desire would be similar to any other policy that comes before this large committee around. I don't know that the expectation would be that there would be any follow-up. It just would be dependent upon each committee. Upon each policy. So I think that there's going to be traffic stops. It's probably not going to necessarily need the same level of staff involvement that use of force might. And so I think that is probably a good question for the broader committee as the policies are selected for that year work plan, is an opportunity to make sure that we're balancing and not overtasking the police department staff, especially in light of the hiring situation that we're hearing.
Mhm. So I'm wondering, and maybe Jessica, you're the one to answer this. Is this something that we adopt as a committee? What is the next step to this that we need to take?
Sounds like we need a policy on this. Just kidding.
So are you talking it through as is, as proposed? What would?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is this something that this recommendation of this plan, is this something that that we would approve as a committee? And that we receive this recommendation and we would take official vote on that this is a process in which we want to move forward with. And does that need a vote, or is that a consensus, or what? I'm just not clear on the procedure part of this.
Well, you do need to have a quorum for conducting business, simple majority vote. So that's the basis of the committee. And if this is, to me, I would say it falls under that in the sense that you're making a business decision.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I don't think it would be, I don't know, I don't want to split hairs on terminology, but it's not necessarily a policy. It could be just basically a business process that you're agreeing to for how to operate meetings in the coming year. And then it's not going to be officially adopted into a charge or a bylaw or anything like that at this point. It's simply an agreement on how you intend to proceed. And I think basically on that, you would have the opportunity to readdress it if need be at any time. That's how I would interpret this.
I would ask then if the subcommittee feels like that's the way to go. Can we just have a general consensus that this is a procedure that we're going to adopt in this next year, and that we will begin to look at some of these different policies? Does that sound good to folks? A hand raised, thumb up. Good, good. Johnny, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Joe, you're good. Okay. So then my question is, do we want to take on a policy or two right now that we would begin to receive and review and try to, I love the concept of visiting with others in the community and getting feedback. And is that a process that we could start? And from the subcommittee, do you have one or two policies that you would think we would want to start with? Joe.
I'd just be looking at the charge of this committee. I would just want to have someone review before a committee actually creates a policy. And that I think it would be wise to make sure that at least we have the city attorney look at that and compare it to the charge of the committee, so it doesn't run afoul to how committees are put together and to what level of authority they can create, so to speak. And I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying that I think if maybe Jessica could get the crux of what Barry's saying and maybe give Mary Bridget a call tomorrow and see if that's something that this committee is through the eyes of the charter and through the charge of the committee, whether that's something that we can jump onto and do, basically take an action in it and to take an action before we actually know that it would be okay. If that makes any sense.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. And again, maybe I misspoke, but I do not, I was taking this as this was a suggested process, not a policy. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly. And that's how I would pose. I'm happy to forward that on to the city attorney's office for review, just for verification. And I'll pose it in that lens, as well as, depending on how you'd want to do it. I don't know if you would want to, it sounded like the recommendation was to potentially make a calendar to have some expected policy review time. So maybe, I'm not trying to do incorrect work, but maybe that's the takeaway of prioritizing where you'd like to.
I'm just saying that if the subcommittee that they could accept an outline of tasks that this committee has asked them to perform and looking for the outcomes of those tasks, as opposed to creating a policy, which I'm not sure any of the committees in the city are allowed to create policy. So I can see that as a consensus saying it's the wish of this committee to set out tasks and a work plan for the small work group and to check in with the committee as a whole on these future dates. And I think, to me, that would flow fine and not run afoul or potentially run afoul of anything else in regular practices.
Well, I also understand, right, that we're not making policy nor changing policy. We are giving maybe some feedback, but that's it. We don't have the authority to create or change policy.
Right. And that's all I'm saying is I know what you're saying I agree with what you're saying is that we can set a process up for as a as a guide for this work group as a committee and move on from there. I'm fine with that.
And may I just take a moment? I might be misunderstanding. I believe this proposal for the calendared plan is actually to bring back to SPAC as a whole, not the subcommittee. The reference subcommittee is simply to make an initial list and recommendation to SPAC, just making sure I understand.
Yeah.
That's my understanding as well.
Perfect. Thank you for doing that.
I apologize that maybe I'm a little slower, but I just want to make sure we're clear. So what I'm hearing is the next step will be creating a calendar in which we will begin to just read and review policies and seeking to give any feedback from the community that we can and passing those along in the right channels. But the first step really will be creating a calendar and then getting those policies to this committee. Am I close?
Yep.
Okay.
I think, yes, that's how I understood it too. And I think that as I look at this, list that Brittany did such a great job of pulling. The good news is it's kind of like a checklist that you've already started because we just closed body worn and use force. So good job.
I like it. Okay, any more on this topic from the team, the sub-team, or the team as a whole?
No, just thanks to everyone for the feedback and discussion, and special thanks to Jenna and Terry for all their work on it. I really appreciate it. And Jessica, of course, too.
Of course, Jessica.
Yeah,
We
As well
could
as you.
not
As well
move
as
forward without
you.
Jessica.
exactly.
Yes.
So before we would go to member information, just is there anything, and I guess that would fall into that as well, but have we missed anything tonight, or is there something that that we need to cover that we've overlooked? Okay, and then anything from the members tonight that they want to share, just any thoughts, anything that you're wanting us to make sure that we cover in our next meetings? Now would be a great time. So I'd like to make sure, and I'm gonna apologize again, because I'm always trying to get caught up on things. Lieutenant Crowley, you were talking about maybe a video that we could watch. Maybe you're gonna look into that for our next meeting, that would show some kind of internal accountability, is how I'm forgetting the initials or the names you were using for that. But I wanted to just be clear that potentially you'll look into that as a possibility, and we can watch that so that we can be informed on that for the next meeting.
So my understanding of what Councilor Pictionary was asking was basically to show the committee what this product is that we're be purchasing and how it works, how efficient it is, not just tell you, oh, we have bells and whistles and technology now, but you get to see firsthand what a demonstration of the capabilities of the software is. And that's what I plan on looking into, to see if it's something you can, it may be as easy as giving you a link on a website, to be honest with you. I just don't know.
Okay.
I've been wearing a lot of hats lately. That's not one I was dealing with. Sergeant Massey was dealing with that. I will ask, and I think it may be as simple as a link to a demo of how something works that will hopefully answer all your questions on it.
Just, could you give me the software name again? That's what I missed.
IA Pro.
IA Pro. Perfect.
Yes.
And we just actually finalized procurement of that this week, and we haven't even had the opportunity to schedule the general kickoff meeting to discuss schedule, scoping, implementation, training. You know, there's a lot of, so I'm just from a kind of the administrative support project management perspective, we are going to address this in an efficient manner, but take the time to make sure that it's prepared mindfully and well thought out. So I just don't want the expectation of, yes, we bought it and we're turning it on next week. I mean, there's some logic, some process and work to be done, but I bet you by the next meeting that we'll have a lot of good information for you on that update. So maybe in addition to the link or video as a preview, we'll have some good project status information as well.
Thank
If I
you.
can, Barry, if I can chime in for a minute, real quick. I appreciate the committee's interest in a lot of this stuff. The subcommittee on the policy review and that type of thing. I think, you know, probably beginning of my career, you probably get a lot of eye rolls from people about, oh gosh, someone's looking into this or asking about that. I think it's important we get that feedback from you through the citizens, through you, and same with through council when we hear about these things. One of the items I saw on the list, you don't have to put it up on the screen, Jess, it's okay. I think it was employee wellness. It addressed things like that. That type of interest means a lot to me. It's not just a policy about use of force or canines. employee wellness is a big deal. And to see that the committee is interested in that means a lot to me. So thank you for your interest in that.
Very good. Thank you. Any other items to share from any of the committee members? Okay. Then I would suggest that we close this meeting at 7:21, and we would be regathering at our next appointed time. That's a way of saying I don't have that date in my head.
June 3rd.
Month out.
June 3rd. Perfect. Very good.
And on that topic, and
Yeah.
I'm not trying to lead any direction whatsoever, but in July, there's occasionally schedule conflicts in that regard. First week of July is difficult for vacations. I just want to mention that now so people can think about it and maybe be prepared to speak to it at the June meeting so that we're not surprised on that. Just a past experience tip.
Yep. That makes complete sense to me. So we will plan to meet June 3rd, and then part of the agenda that night as well will be discussing what we wanted to do in the month of July. So
Perfect.
Hey, Jessica, it's Terry. Can you hold on just a minute after everything is closed?
Actually, no, I turn it off because it's recorded, but I will
Oh.
make a note and follow up on you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
all right, our meeting is adjourned, and I wish you all a good evening. Thank you for your time and all your hard work.
Yeah.
Thank you. Everybody have a good evening.
Good night.